Hey everyone, I'm Eric, I'm 28, and at my own sister's wedding, my father toasted me by telling a room full of people that I was a waste of space. Before I tell you how that single moment led to the complete implosion of my family and the revelation of a secret inheritance they'd kept from me my entire life, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's good to know I'm not alone in this. The wedding reception was a masterclass in my mother's aesthetic. Tasteful, expensive, and suffocatingly perfect. The ballroom of the country club gleamed under the light of crystal chandeliers. Towering floral arrangements of white roses and peonies scented the air. A string quartet played softly in the corner. It was a fairy tale, and my sister, Clara, was the princess at its center. She was radiant, truly. Her dress probably cost more than my car. Her new husband, David, a perfectly pleasant guy from a good family, looked at her with a kind of dazed adoration. I did my best to play my part. I was the brother of the bride, the son of the proud parents. My role was simple. Smile, be charming, and don't do anything to disrupt the flawless facade. For hours, I did just that. I navigated the sea of pastel dresses and dark suits, shaking hands with people whose names I'd forget in minutes. I listened to my father, Richard, hold court, telling the same business anecdotes he'd been telling for a decade. I watched my mother, Helen, glide through the room, her smile a fixed, brilliant thing, ensuring every guest felt welcomed and every detail was perfect. I felt like a ghost at the feast, present in body but completely invisible in spirit. Then came the toasts, the part of the evening I had been dreading. My father stood, tapping a fork against his champagne flute. The room fell into an expectant hush. He was in his element, the center of attention, the patriarch presiding over his domain. He began with a practiced warmth, welcoming David's family, praising his new son-in-law's promising career in finance. Then he turned to Clara, his golden girl. He spoke of her first steps, her straight A's, her equestrian trophies. It was a highlight reel of a perfect life, and he was the proud director. To my daughter, Clara, he said, his voice thick with emotion, you have exceeded every hope a father could ever have. The room cooed. People dabbed at their eyes. My mother looked on, her face a mask of maternal pride. And then his eyes found me. I was at a table in the back, seated between a great aunt I barely knew and one of David's college friends. It wasn't a mistake. It was a statement. But his gaze cut through the crowd and pinned me to my seat. A slow smile, the kind a predator gives before the strike, spread across his face. He lifted his glass a little higher. You know, he said, his voice resonating through the microphone. As a parent, you have dreams for your children. He paused, letting the silence stretch. Some kids, they make you proud. They hit every mark. He beamed at Clara again. And others. He let the word hang there, twisting in the air. His eyes locked with mine. Well, others just take up space. The words landed with the force of a physical impact. A few people gasped, a sharp intake of breath in the quiet room. But my father's power was absolute in this circle. So after the initial shock, the laughter started. It wasn't loud or joyous. It was a nervous, tittering sound, the sound of people who know something is wrong but are too afraid to defy the man in charge. My own family, my aunts and uncles, they chuckled into their napkins. My mother's smile didn't waver, but it became brittle, like glass about to shatter. David looked at his shoes, and my father just stood there, basking in the glow of his own casual cruelty. He had just declared me worthless, and the world he had built agreed with him. In that moment, a lifetime of resentment, of being minimized, of being treated like a disappointing line item on a balance sheet, crystallized into a single cold point of clarity. The fear was gone. The shame was gone. There was nothing left but the truth. I pushed my chair back, the sound scraping loudly across the polished floor. I stood up and picked up my full, untouched glass of champagne. I wasn't shaking. I was perfectly still. I smiled at him, a wide, genuine smile that I knew would infuriate him. Well, Dad, I said, my voice carrying effortlessly across the silent room. Good thing I just got my own place 2,000 miles away. I raised my glass not to him but to the room at large. Don't worry, I added, my smile never faltering. You'll never have to see me take up space again. A collective gasp went through the room. My father's face was a thundercloud of disbelief and rage. I placed my glass deliberately on the table, turned my back on the 200 stunned guests, and walked out of the ballroom. The heavy doors swung shut behind me, leaving me in the sudden, blessed quiet of the hallway. I hadn't just left a party. I had just declared war. The hotel room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioner. I didn't sleep. How could I? I just stared at the textured ceiling, watching the headlights of passing cars cast fleeting shadows on the walls. The scene from the wedding played on a relentless loop in my mind. My father's smirk, the sound of that awful laughter, my mother's frozen face. It wasn't just the humiliation that kept me awake. It was the dawning, horrifying realization that none of it was new. The only thing that had changed was the audience. The next day, I made the 3-hour drive back to my parents' sprawling house in the Indiana suburbs. I was still living there, in an apartment over their 3-car garage. They called it the carriage house, a quaint name for what was, in reality, a gilded cage. It gave me the illusion of independence while keeping me firmly within their orbit, under their financial and emotional jurisdiction. They were waiting for me in the kitchen, sitting at the granite island, nursing cups of coffee. The Sunday paper was spread between them like a barricade. The silence was heavy, accusatory. You made quite an exit, my father said finally, his eyes fixed on the stock market report. It was the opening salvo, not of an apology, but of a counterattack. I felt it was appropriate, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I walked to the coffee maker and poured myself a cup. My hand was steady. My mother, Helen, sighed dramatically. It was one of her signature moves, a sound freighted with years of supposed maternal suffering. Eric, please, she said, her voice strained. Your father was making a joke. It was in poor taste, I'll grant you, but your reaction. You embarrassed the entire family, running out like a hysterical child. David's parents were speechless. He called me a waste of space, I said, turning to face them. He said it into a microphone. The only thing I find embarrassing is that you both seem to think that's acceptable. Oh, don't be so dramatic, she snapped, her mask of concern slipping to reveal the hard impatience beneath. That's your problem, Eric. You're too sensitive. You always have been. You twist things. My phone buzzed. A text from Clara, already on her honeymoon. A photo of 2 champagne glasses clinking against a sunset backdrop. Having the most amazing time. Hope you're not too hungover. The casual cruelty of it, the complete denial of what had happened, was breathtaking. I looked back at my parents, at their defensive postures and their utter lack of remorse, and the past came rushing in, not as a series of isolated incidents, but as a clear, undeniable pattern. It was a system, a family economy where Clara was the blue-chip stock, always soaring, and I was the risky venture, always on the verge of failure. I remembered being 12 and starting a lawn-mowing business in the neighborhood. I'd made flyers, saved up for a second-hand mower. I was proud. My father had pulled me aside and given me a lecture on the folly of manual labor and the importance of scalable ventures. A year later, when Clara started a dog-walking service, he called her a young entrepreneur, invested in her business cards, and bragged about her gumption at dinner parties. I remembered the car crash versus the tuition. But there was more. Clara dropped out of her pre-med program after 2 years, deciding she wanted to study art history instead. My parents called it finding her passion, and paid for a trip to Italy to inspire her. I changed my focus within the architecture program from commercial to residential design, a move that required a single extra semester. My father demanded a 10-page proposal outlining the career prospects and return on investment. Every victory of hers was celebrated. Every struggle of mine was a character flaw. I looked at my father, who was now glaring at me over the top of his newspaper. If you want love, he'd told me 1,000 times, in 1,000 different ways, you have to earn it. I finally understood. Love in this house wasn't a right. It was a performance bonus. And I was perpetually failing to meet my quota. I'm done, I said, the words quiet but final. Done with what? My father sneered. Done with throwing a tantrum? Done with this? I said, gesturing around the perfect kitchen. Done with trying to earn something that you should have given me for free. I poured my coffee down the sink, turned, and walked out. I didn't go back to the carriage house. I went up to my childhood bedroom, a room that felt more like a museum of a boy they'd hoped I'd be. I opened my laptop, and on a blank screen, I created a new spreadsheet. The name I typed in the header was Oxygen. It was time to find my own air to breathe. For the next few weeks, a fragile, unspoken truce settled over the house. My parents treated me with a sort of cautious distance, like I was a wild animal that might bolt. They were giving me space to cool off, confident that I would eventually come to my senses and resume my role in the family hierarchy. They had no idea that I wasn't cooling off. I was planning. The Oxygen spreadsheet became my entire world. It was my secret project, my lifeline. I spent hours every night researching cities, comparing cost of living, scanning job boards for architecture firms. The list of potential destinations was a map to a new life. Denver, with its mountains and thriving art scene. Austin, with its vibrant, creative energy. Seattle, a hub of innovation. Every city represented a possibility, a world away from the suffocating atmosphere of my parents' home. But a plan is just a dream without resources. The escape fund column was a glaring, taunting zero. My finances were a tangled mess, deliberately so. My main bank account was still linked to my parents, a holdover from my teenage years that they'd conveniently never encouraged me to change. I couldn't just withdraw a large sum without setting off alarm bells. I needed cash, and I needed it to be untraceable. That's when I started selling my life. I began with the small things, the remnants of my hobbies and past interests. I sold my old guitar, my collection of graphic novels, a vintage camera. I used online marketplaces, arranging for cash pickups in public places. I opened a new bank account at a small credit union in a neighboring state, a digital fortress where I could stash my growing fund. Each deposit, whether it was $50 or $200, felt like a victory. Soon, I ran out of the easy things. I had to go deeper. I had to start selling the things that were tied to them, the artifacts of my gilded cage. There was a set of first-edition classic novels, bound in dark green leather, that they had given me for my high school graduation. They sat on my shelf, looking impressive, a symbol of the intellectual son they wanted. I'd never even read them. I felt a twinge of guilt as I listed them online, but it was quickly replaced by a surge of satisfaction when a collector offered me $1,000. The hardest was the watch, a beautiful, slim Omega DeVille from the 1960s. It had belonged to my grandfather, my mother's father, a kind, quiet man who had always made me feel seen. He'd left it to me in his will, but my father had insisted on keeping it in his safe for safekeeping until I was mature enough. He'd presented it to me on my 25th birthday with a grand speech about family legacy. But wearing it didn't make me feel connected to my grandfather. It made me feel branded by my father. Selling it felt like a betrayal of one man and a liberation from another. A dealer in Chicago bought it for just over $3,000. The money felt heavy in my account, but my wrist felt incredibly light. One afternoon, my mother came into the carriage house unannounced, using her own key. It was a common power move. She found me wrapping the leather-bound books in bubble wrap. "What are you doing with those?" she asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. "Selling them," I said calmly, not looking up. "I need the cash." "Selling them?" "Eric, we gave you those. They're heirlooms." "They're books, Mom," I said, taping the box shut. "And they're mine to sell." She stared at me, her mind clearly racing, trying to understand this new, defiant version of her son. She saw the empty space on my bookshelf, and I could see the suspicion hardening in her eyes. "You're up to something," she said, her voice low. "I'm just cleaning house," I replied, meeting her gaze. She left without another word, but I knew she was rattled. The walls were closing in. I had to move faster. That night, I called my best friend, Mark. He was a software engineer in California, and the only person on earth who truly understood my family. They're catching on, I told him, pacing my small apartment. Mom saw me packing up some stuff to sell. She's suspicious. Of course she is, Mark said, his voice grim. Control freaks have a sixth sense for when they're losing control. You need to get out, man. Sooner rather than later. What's the fund at? Almost 7,000, I said. It's not enough to last long, but it's enough to go. Then go, he urged. Pick a city, pack a bag, and go. We'll figure out the rest later. His certainty was a balm to my frayed nerves. He made it sound so simple. Maybe it was. Maybe the hardest part was just making the decision. After we hung up, I opened the spreadsheet. I looked at the list of cities, the dozens of job listings I had saved. It was time to stop planning and start doing. It was time to launch the message in a bottle. The phone call came a week later, on a quiet Wednesday evening. It was my father. My stomach immediately clenched. He rarely called my cell phone. He preferred to summon me to the main house. A direct call meant something was different. His voice, when he spoke, was unnervingly gentle. It was his major client voice, the one he used to soothe ruffled feathers or close a deal. It was a weapon, and it was aimed directly at me. Eric, son. How are you? I'm fine, Dad, I said, keeping my own voice flat and non-committal. Good, good, he said a little too heartily. Listen, your mother and I were talking. We feel that perhaps we've been a bit hard on you. I almost dropped the phone. This was a new tactic. The apology or the illusion of one. We know you've been under a lot of pressure, he continued, his voice smooth as silk. And that comment I made at the wedding, it was unforgivable. A stupid, clumsy joke from an old man who'd had a little too much champagne. I'm sorry. I truly am. The words were right, but the tone was all wrong. It was rehearsed. There was no real emotion behind it, only calculation. He was reading from a script. We're family, Eric, he went on, laying the sentiment on thick. And families go through rough patches. But we stick together. Your life is here. You have a great future at the firm here if you just apply yourself. Don't throw all of that away because of one misunderstanding. He was dangling the bait. Forgiveness, acceptance, a secure future. All I had to do was come back into the fold, put the leash back on, and pretend none of it had ever happened. A few years ago, I would have leaped at the offer. I would have been flooded with relief. But now, all I felt was a cold, clear-eyed disdain. He wasn't apologizing for his cruelty. He was apologizing for getting caught. I appreciate the call, Dad, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I have to go. Eric, wait. I hung up. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a surge of adrenaline. He knew. He didn't know the specifics, but he sensed me pulling away for good, and he was panicking. His display of force at the wedding had backfired, so now he was trying seduction. It was all about control. His call galvanized me. The time for hesitation was over. That night, I didn't just browse job listings. I applied. I spent 6 hours refining my portfolio, crafting personalized cover letters, and sending my resume out into the world. I applied to a dozen firms in Denver, Seattle, and Austin. And then there was Portland. Sterling Cole Architects. They were the dream job, a firm at the cutting edge of sustainable design. Their work was elegant, innovative, and purposeful. It was everything I wanted my own career to be. Applying there felt different. It felt less like an escape and more like a destination. I wrote a passionate, honest cover letter, explaining why their philosophy resonated with me. I attached my best work, took a deep breath, and clicked send. The application vanished into the ether. As I shut down my laptop, I felt a profound sense of calm. The bridges were burning behind me, and for the first time I wasn't scared. I was ready to see what was on the other side. A week later, an email appeared in my inbox that would change my life forever. The subject line was simple. Interview request, Sterling Cole Architects. The message in a bottle had been found. My first interview was a video call with Sterling Cole's head of HR, Jessica. It was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon, and I spent the entire morning in a state of nervous excitement. I turned the carriage house into a makeshift studio, ensuring the lighting was perfect and the background was a neutral, professional-looking bookshelf. The interview was a revelation. Jessica wasn't just asking rote questions. She was engaged, curious. She asked about my design philosophy, about the challenges of a specific project in my portfolio. It was the first time in years a professional had looked at my work and seen potential instead of a list of flaws. The conversation flowed easily, and by the time we signed off an hour later, she was already talking about a second interview with the department head. I allowed myself a small, fragile sliver of hope. That hope was shattered by a phone call later that same day. The caller ID read Clara. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the ignore button, but a morbid curiosity won out. I answered. It wasn't her usual breezy, self-assured tone. It was a choked, desperate sob. Eric? She managed to get out. He's gone. Who's gone? I asked, my mind immediately jumping to our father. Is it Dad? No, she cried, a fresh wave of sobs shaking her voice. It's David. He left. He packed a bag this morning and just left. He said he needs space. He said he feels like he's suffocating. The word suffocating hung in the air between us. The irony was so thick I could taste it. My first uncharitable thought was a bitter now you know how it feels. But the raw pain in her voice cut through my resentment. This wasn't the golden girl, the family favorite. This was just a woman whose world had just been torn apart. Where are you? I asked, my voice softening. At the house, she stammered. Our house. The one Dad helped us buy. Stay there. I'm on my way. The house was a monument to my father's influence. A massive, soulless McMansion in a gated community. The front door was unlocked. I found Clara in the cavernous living room, huddled on a white sofa that was still pristine. The room was filled with unopened wedding gifts, towers of boxes that now looked like gravestones. She looked broken. Her makeup was smeared. Her perfect hair was falling out of its elegant twist. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. He said he couldn't do it anymore, she whispered. He said he didn't just marry me. He married my whole family. He said Dad was calling him every day with advice on his career, his investments, even on when we should have a baby. He said he felt like he was just another one of Dad's assets. I sat down beside her, a strange feeling washing over me. It was pity, yes, but also a grim sort of validation. I wasn't crazy. The toxicity was real, so real that it had driven away a man who had, just weeks ago, looked at my sister like she was the sun. I didn't say, I told you so. I didn't need to. I just put my arm around her, and she collapsed against me, crying out all the shock and betrayal. We sat like that for a long time. It was probably the first time I had hugged my sister since we were children. Later, as I drove her back to our parents' house, she was quiet. She stared out the window at the passing landscape of manicured lawns and identical houses. As we pulled into the long, curving driveway, she finally turned to me. Her face was pale, but her eyes were startlingly clear. You were right to leave the wedding, she said, her voice barely a whisper. You were right all along. I didn't want to see it. She reached out and squeezed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. When I called them this morning, do you know what Dad's first move was? He didn't ask how I was. He wanted to call his lawyer to review the prenup, to make sure his investment in the house was protected. He was already planning for the divorce. Thank you, Eric, she said, her voice breaking again. When my world fell apart today, you were the only one who showed up. She got out of the car and walked towards the imposing front door of our parents' house. For the first time, I didn't see her as the princess returning to her castle. I saw her as a fellow prisoner, walking back into her cell. But now, at least she knew she was locked in. And that knowledge was the first step towards finding the key. The week that followed was surreal. Clara moved back into her childhood bedroom, a silent, ghost-like presence in the house. My parents, meanwhile, went into damage control mode. To the outside world, they spun a story of a young couple needing temporary space. But inside the house, they were closing ranks, their energy focused on the new crisis. This unexpectedly gave me cover. With all eyes on Clara's marital implosion, no one was paying attention to me. I had my second interview with Sterling Cole, a technical discussion with the department head that went exceptionally well. The escape fund grew past the $10,000 mark. My secret life was flourishing in the shadow of my family's drama. I got careless. My cousin, Josh, stopped by the carriage house one evening with a six-pack of beer. We had grown up together more like brothers than cousins. He was a good guy at heart, but his defining characteristic was a deep-seated desire to please everyone, especially my father. "Man, things are crazy in there," he said, gesturing towards the main house. "How are you holding up?" We talked for a while, and the beer and the easy familiarity of our shared history lulled me into a false sense of security. I didn't tell him about Portland. I didn't tell him about the money, but I vented. I told him I couldn't take it anymore, that the atmosphere in the house was unbearable. I admitted that I was actively looking for jobs in other cities, that I was planning on making a move before the end of the year. "I don't blame you, man," he said, shaking his head. "This place is a pressure cooker. You gotta do what's right for you. Your secret's safe with me." I believed him. That was my mistake. 2 days later, on a Friday afternoon, my mother called me. Her voice was dripping with a manufactured sweetness that immediately set my alarms ringing. "Eric, dear," she cooed, "I was just thinking, with everything poor Clara is going through, we haven't had a proper family dinner in ages. It would do us all a world of good to come together. I'm making my special beef brisket. This Sunday. Just the family." My blood turned to ice. Just the family. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. Josh had talked. He must have mentioned my plans to his mother, my D. Carol, the family's chief gossip and my mother's most loyal lieutenant. And now the trap was being set. They were planning an intervention, a united front designed to crush my little rebellion before it could get off the ground. My first instinct was to make an excuse, to claim I was sick, to hide. But I was tired of hiding. I thought of the interview, of the escape fund, of the life that was waiting for me. I was so close. I couldn't falter now. "You know what, Mom?" I said, forcing a cheerful tone into my voice. "That sounds wonderful. I wouldn't miss it. If they wanted a war, I'd bring the battle to them. But I wouldn't be walking in unprepared." After I hung up the phone, I walked over to the main house. The study was empty. I sat down at the family computer, my heart pounding in my chest. I opened the web browser and clicked on the history. My breath caught in my throat. There, in a list of recent searches under my mother's login, was everything I needed to know. How to read emails on a shared Wi-Fi network. Signs your child is planning to move away. Top architecture firms in Portland, Oregon. The betrayal was so cold, so absolute, it felt like a physical blow. She hadn't just heard a rumor. She had been actively spying on me. She had violated my privacy, treating me not as a son, but as a problem to be managed and contained. Any lingering hope I had for a peaceful resolution, for a shred of understanding, died in that moment. This wasn't a family. It was a regime, and I was the dissident they were about to purge. For a few minutes, I just sat there, staring at the screen, a white-hot rage building in my chest. I wanted to storm into the living room and confront her, to scream and shout and throw the evidence of her betrayal in her face. But I didn't. An explosion was what they wanted. It would fit their narrative perfectly. Eric, the dramatic, sensitive, unstable one, flying off the handle again. It would give them the moral high ground. They could shake their heads with pity and tell each other they were right to be worried. No, I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. I would be cold. I would be strategic. I would use their own tactics against them. I had one more interview with Sterling Cole, a final call with the CEO, Marcus Sterling himself, scheduled for the following Monday. This Sunday dinner was their preemptive strike, designed to break me down and force me to cancel that call. I took a breath, my mind racing. I couldn't just wait for their ambush. I needed a countermove. I needed my own element of surprise. It was a wild, desperate idea, the kind of thing you see in movies. But my life had started to feel like a poorly written drama anyway. What did I have to lose? I found Marcus Sterling's email address on the firm's website. My hands were slick with sweat as I composed the message. I rewrote it a dozen times, trying to strike the perfect balance between professional and candid, urgent but not unhinged. Subject: acknowledgement and question regarding my final interview. Eric. Last name: Dear Mr. Sterling, I am writing to express my profound gratitude for the opportunity to interview with you this coming Monday. My conversations with Jessica and the department head have only solidified my belief that Sterling Cole is where I hope to build my career. I must, however, broach a delicate and unusual subject. I am currently in a highly contentious family situation. My decision to seek opportunities outside of my hometown is being met with significant resistance from my father, who also happens to be my current employer in a less formal sense. He views this move not as a career advancement, but as a personal betrayal. They have discovered my intentions, through invasive means, I'm sorry to say, and have scheduled a family dinner for this Sunday evening. I have every reason to believe this is an orchestrated intervention designed to pressure me into abandoning this opportunity. It will be a high-stakes encounter, essentially a hearing to determine the future of my own life. This brings me to my unorthodox request. The outcome of my interview with you is not just a professional matter for me. It is the fulcrum on which my personal freedom rests. Having a definitive answer from you, whether it's a yes or a no, would provide me with the leverage I desperately need to navigate this confrontation. Would you, by any chance, be available for a brief, prearranged video call on Sunday evening, around 7:30 p.m.? I am acutely aware of how unusual this is. If it is impossible, I completely understand and look forward to our scheduled call on Monday. But in this unique circumstance, information is power, and your answer holds the key. Thank you for your consideration. Sincerely, Eric. I stared at the send button for a full minute, my heart hammering against my ribs. This could backfire spectacularly. Mr. Sterling could see me as a liability, a drama magnet, and cancel the interview altogether. But the alternative, walking into that dinner powerless, was worse. I clicked send. The next 48 hours were an exercise in controlled panic. I went about my routine, exchanging tense but polite nods with my parents. All the while, I was refreshing my inbox every 5 minutes. Nothing on Friday. Nothing on Saturday. By Sunday morning, a grim certainty had settled in. He wasn't going to reply. I had overplayed my hand. I was on my own. I spent the day preparing for battle. I went for a long run, pushing myself until my lungs burned, trying to convert my anxiety into physical exhaustion. I showered and dressed with care, choosing a dark, simple shirt and trousers. Armor. At 5 p.m., my phone chimed. An email. My hands shook as I opened it. Subject: acknowledgement and question. Eric, your candor is appreciated. I've been in business a long time. I understand high-stakes negotiations, both in the boardroom and at the dinner table. Leverage is everything. 7:30 p.m. sharp works for me. I'll have your answer then. Make sure your phone is charged. Regards. A tidal wave of relief washed over me, so intense it almost buckled my knees. He got it. He actually got it. I didn't know if the news would be good or bad, but it didn't matter. I wasn't walking into the lion's den empty-handed anymore. I had a secret weapon. I looked at myself in the mirror. The fear and uncertainty were gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Let the games begin, I whispered. The walk from the carriage house to the main house was the longest 50 yards of my life. Every step felt deliberate, final. When I opened the back door and stepped into the kitchen, the scene was exactly as I had pictured it. It was an ambush disguised as a family dinner. My mother, Helen, turned from the stove, her face arranged in a mask of loving concern. Eric, darling, you're just in time. We were about to open a wonderful bottle of Cabernet. Her voice was too bright, too cheerful. My father, Richard, was by the fireplace in the adjoining great room, swirling a glass of scotch. He gave me a curt nod. "Eric, glad you could make it." It was the tone he used for a subordinate who was late to a meeting. And there, perched on a love seat, was my aunt, Dee Carroll. She was my mother's younger sister and her most trusted enforcer. She smiled at me, a thin, pitying expression. "Eric, sweetheart, we've all been so worried sick about you." Clara was the only one who looked genuinely uncomfortable. She was curled in an oversized armchair, staring into the fire. She looked up as I came in, her eyes wide and pleading, as if to say, "Don't do this. Just give in." They spent the next 30 minutes trying to pretend this was normal. They peppered me with questions about work, about my friends, about my car. It was a clumsy interrogation disguised as small talk. Each question was a little probe designed to find a weakness. I gave them nothing. I answered in short, polite, non-committal sentences. I was a gray rock. My calmness was my shield, and I could feel it unnerving them. They had prepared for a fight, for an emotional outburst. They didn't know what to do with this quiet, detached stranger. We sat down at the dining room table, a battlefield set with my mother's best china and silver. My father took his place at the head of the table, the seat of judgment. He began to carve the beef brisket, the long, sharp knife glinting under the chandelier. The symbolism was not lost on me. He cleared his throat. The pleasantries were over. "Eric," he began, his voice a low, serious rumble. "We need to talk. This behavior of yours since the wedding has us all deeply concerned." "You've been pulling away," my mother chimed in, her voice trembling artfully. "You've been angry, secretive. We're your family. We just want to help. Your cousin Josh told us you're thinking of doing something reckless," Dee Carroll added, twisting the knife. "Leaving town. Throwing away your future here." They had me surrounded. 3 voices, one unified message. "You are the problem. We are the solution." I took a slow sip of water. I let the silence stretch, forcing them to wait for my response. "I'm not running away from my problems," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'm walking towards my future." My father scoffed, placing the carving knife down with a clatter. "What future? You have a career path here. You have a family that, despite your recent attitude, loves you and supports you. What could you possibly find in some strange city that you don't have here?" "Respect," I said simply. The word dropped onto the table like a stone. "Respect?" he repeated, his voice rising in disbelief. "We gave you everything. A home, an Ivy League education, a life other kids would kill for. We funded your college expenses when your grades slipped. And you talk to us about respect. Don't turn this into another one of your rebellions, Eric." My mother pleaded, her eyes welling with tears. It was a masterful performance. "You've always been so dramatic, making mountains out of molehills." "A molehill?" I asked, looking her directly in the eye. "Is that what you call publicly humiliating your son? Is that what you call spying on his private emails? Are those molehills to you, Mom?" The color drained from her face. Dee Carroll gasped. My father's eyes narrowed into slits. The pretense was over. The battle had begun. "You've always been cruel," I said, my voice no longer quiet. It was clear and sharp and echoed in the suddenly silent room. "Both of you. The only difference is that Dad does it with a hammer, and Mom does it with a smile." "How dare you speak to your mother that way?" my father growled, his hand clenching into a fist on the tablecloth. "I dare," I said, leaning forward, "because you left me with nothing to lose." I glanced at the ornate grandfather clock in the corner of the room. Its long golden pendulum swung back and forth, methodical, relentless. 7:24 p.m. The air in the room was electric, vibrating with years of unspoken anger and resentment. My father looked like he was about to launch himself across the table. My mother was pale with shock. Clara was staring at me as if she'd never seen me before. They thought this was the climax. They thought this was the moment they would break me. They had no idea it was just the overture. The real show was about to start. Nothing to lose? My father roared, his voice bouncing off the high ceilings. He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. You have everything to lose, and you're too naive to even see it. You live under my roof. You work at a firm where my name opens doors for you. You are where you are because of me. No, I said, my voice cutting through his tirade like a surgeon's scalpel. I am where I am in spite of you. Every success I've had to fight for, tooth and nail, against your constant criticism and your condescending help. You don't open doors for me, Dad. You stand in the doorway. I turned my gaze to my mother, who was now staring at her plate, unable to meet my eyes. And you, Mom, you talk about love and family, but you went through my private computer. You snooped through my emails. Tell me what part of that is love? What part of that isn't a complete and total violation? She looked up, her face a mess of defensive tears. I was worried, she cried. I saw you selling your things. I heard you were planning to run away. A mother has a right to know if her child is in trouble. I'm not a child. I shot back, my voice rising. I am a 28-year-old man. And you weren't worried. You were gathering intelligence for him? I said, jabbing a finger towards my father. You're not his wife. You're his accomplice. You smooth things over, you manage his messes, you make his cruelty palatable. You are the velvet glove on his iron fist. DeCarroll gasped theatrically. Eric, that's a monstrous thing to say. Is it? I challenged, my eyes sweeping the table. Is it more monstrous than what was said at the wedding? Is it more monstrous than a father hiding a secret inheritance from his son for a decade? I hadn't meant to say that last part. It just slipped out, a stray thought from my desperate email to Mr. Sterling, but I let it hang in the air. My father froze. For a split second, a flicker of pure, unadulterated panic crossed his face before he masked it with rage. What are you babbling about now? More of your dramatic fantasies. But I saw it. That flicker. It was real. The whole dynamic of the room had shifted. The focus was no longer on my supposed rebellion. It was on him. Clara was frowning, looking from me to our father, a question dawning in her eyes. This is what this has always been about. I pressed on, my voice dropping to a low, intense pitch. It's about control. You need to control everything and everyone. Clara is the perfect daughter because she does exactly what you want. She is a reflection of your success. But I was never as malleable. I had my own ideas, my own dreams. And that scared you. Because a son you can't control is a son you can't own. I own you, he hissed, the words slipping out, a raw and honest admission. After every dollar I have spent on you, you're damn right I do. It was the ugliest thing he had ever said. And the most truthful. He saw me as a piece of property, a poorly performing asset he was trying to whip into shape. The grandfather clock began to chime. 7:30. Right on cue, my phone, which I had placed face down on the table, began to vibrate. The screen lit up. I let it ring a second time, enjoying the confused look on my father's face. Then I calmly picked it up. I accepted the video call and propped the phone against a water goblet, the screen facing the head of the table. I hit the speaker button. The distinguished, composed face of Marcus Sterling filled the screen. Good evening, Eric, he said, his voice calm and authoritative. I hope I'm not interrupting dinner. Not at all, Mr. Sterling, I replied, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. You're right on time. My father stared at the screen, his face a mask of confusion and fury. Who the hell is this? He demanded, his authority already beginning to sound hollow. What is this? Another one of your games? Mr. Sterling's gaze remained fixed on me, but he answered the question. My name is Marcus Sterling. I'm the founding partner of Sterling Cole Architects in Portland. And you must be Eric's father. There was a cool, appraising quality to his voice that made my father bristle. Eric, Mr. Sterling continued, getting right to business. I'll be direct. We've reviewed the feedback from your previous interviews, and we've looked closely at your portfolio again. Your proposal for the Willamette Riverfront project is, frankly, brilliant. It's exactly the kind of forward-thinking, sustainable design we want to be known for. I could feel the energy at the table shift. My father's bluster faltered. This was real. This was a man of substance, a man from my father's world of business and power, and he was praising me. Therefore, Mr. Sterling said, it is my great pleasure to formally offer you the position of Senior Project Architect. The role comes with a significant increase in responsibility, creative control, and a starting salary of $120,000, plus a $20,000 signing bonus and a comprehensive relocation package to cover your move to Portland. The numbers hung in the air, shimmering and deadly. My mother made a small, strangled sound. DeCarroll's jaw was literally hanging open. My father looked like he had been punched in the gut. A six-figure salary. A senior position. This wasn't a dead-end job in some rainy city. This was a major career move. This was real, tangible success, achieved without him. Of course, Mr. Sterling went on, his expression turning serious. Your acceptance of this offer triggers another important matter. I took the liberty of speaking with the lawyer who handles your maternal grandfather's estate this afternoon. My head snapped up. There it was again. It appears your grandfather was a very wise man, Mr. Sterling said, and now he looked directly at the phone's camera, as if staring right at my father. He established a significant private trust fund for you upon his death. An inheritance. However, he stipulated in his will that the trust was to remain sealed and inaccessible to you under one very specific condition was met. He paused, letting the suspense build. The funds were to be released to you, and only to you, on the day you secured a professional position and salary commensurate with your education, entirely independent of your father's financial or professional influence. He added a personal note for the lawyer, which he shared with me. He said, I want my grandson to be his own man, not an extension of his father's ego. The room was utterly silent. The only sound was the frantic, panicked beating of my own heart. Mr. Sterling delivered the final blow. The current value of that trust, after a decade of growth, is $527,000. By accepting this job, Eric, you have met the terms of the will. The lawyer will be in touch tomorrow to arrange the transfer. Congratulations. He smiled warmly at me. So, Eric, do we have a deal? It all clicked into place. The lie. The monumental, life-altering lie. All the lectures about money, the small loans with interest, the constant pressure to be responsible. It was all a sham. He had known about this money the entire time. He had actively kept me from it, ensuring I remained financially dependent, ensuring I could never escape. It wasn't about building my character. It was about shackling my future. I looked at my father. He wasn't a king anymore. He was just a man, a small, petty, terrified man, exposed in all his ugliness. The rage was gone, the power was gone. All that was left was the pathetic truth. I took a deep, shuddering breath. It was the first breath of a free man. I looked at the phone, at the man who had unknowingly just handed me the keys to my own life. Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice clear and steady. It would be my honor. I accept. CTA. This was the moment that changed everything. The moment I finally took back control of my own life. Thank you for sticking with me to this point. You guys are amazing. If you could, please help me out by liking this video and commenting the number 1 down below, just so I know you've been on this journey with me. It doesn't just help more people find this story. It lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone out there. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to continue sharing the rest of this journey. Mr. Sterling said his goodbyes and the screen went black, leaving only the reflection of the devastated faces around the table. The silence that followed was a living thing. It was heavier than grief, deeper than shock. It was the sound of a world ending. I stood up slowly, my chair making a soft scraping sound on the rug. I felt strangely weightless, as if a physical burden I hadn't known I was carrying had just been lifted from my shoulders. My father was a statue. He stared at the dark screen of my phone, his face the color of ash. The formidable patriarch, The man whose moods had dictated the emotional weather of my entire life was gone. In his place was a hollowed-out old man, shipwrecked on the shores of his own deceit. He had built his kingdom on a foundation of lies, and a single phone call had brought the whole rotten structure crashing down. I walked around the table to where my mother was sitting. She was weeping, but not in her usual performative way. These were the silent, ragged tears of true despair. Her manipulations had failed, her deceptions were exposed. Her entire world, the perfect family she had worked so tirelessly to present to the world, was a smoking ruin. I didn't feel anger towards her anymore. I didn't feel anything at all. It was like looking at a stranger. "I hope you find some peace, Mom," I said, the words coming out quieter than I intended. I looked at Clara. She was staring at our father, and for the first time, I saw not a trace of daughterly affection in her eyes. I saw a horrified disillusionment. She was seeing him for what he was, not the strong, protective father of her childhood, but a petty tyrant who would sabotage his own son to maintain control. Our eyes met, and in that shared glance, a lifetime of rivalry and resentment dissolved. I saw a flicker of shame, of apology, and of a dawning, terrible understanding. I gave her a single, brief nod. It was enough. I turned and walked out of the dining room. I didn't look back. I walked through the cavernous great room, past the family portraits on the wall that all seemed like lies now. My hand was on the front doorknob when his voice came from behind me. A hoarse, broken croak. "Eric, don't you walk away from this family." It wasn't a command. It was a plea. The last, desperate gasp of a drowning man. I turned slowly, my hand still on the cold brass knob. I looked back down the long hallway to the dining room, where he was still sitting at the head of the table, a king in a kingdom of ashes. "I'm not walking away from the family, Dad," I said, my voice even and clear. There was never a family to walk away from. There was just a business. And I quit. I paused for a beat, letting the words sink in. "You walked away from me a long time ago. You just did it so slowly, with so many lectures and so many hollow apologies, that it took me 28 years to finally see you go." I opened the door and stepped out into the cool, damp Indiana night. The air felt clean, fresh. I walked down the stone path, and as I passed a storm drain at the end of the driveway, I reached into my pocket, pulled out the key to the carriage house, and let it fall. It landed with a tiny, metallic clink before disappearing into the darkness. I didn't need it anymore. I was finally going home. 6 months later, the Indiana night felt like a distant, foggy dream. I was standing in my Portland loft, a cup of coffee in my hands, watching the sun rise over Mount Hood. The sky was a brilliant canvas of pink and orange. My apartment was in a converted warehouse in the Pearl District, all exposed brick, high ceilings, and massive windows that flooded the space with light. It was my sanctuary, a place I had built for myself, filled only with things that I had chosen. Life in Portland was a quiet revelation. The work at Sterling Coal was everything I had hoped it would be. It was demanding, creative, and collaborative. My ideas were not just heard. They were sought out. Mr. Sterling became a true mentor. He'd check in on me not in an invasive way but as a colleague. "How are you settling in, Eric? Let me know if you need a recommendation for a good bookstore." He saw me as a person, not just an employee. It was a radical concept. The promotion to lead architect on the waterfront project was made official, and the responsibility was both terrifying and exhilarating. I was finally doing the work I was meant to do. The inheritance was the trickiest part to navigate. It sat in my bank account for weeks, a huge, intimidating number that felt like it belonged to someone else. It was tainted by the lie. I knew I needed professional advice, so I found a lawyer, a sharp woman named Ms. Albright, to help me set up a proper financial plan. We created a diversified investment portfolio, established a retirement fund, and set aside a portion for a future down payment on a house. Taking control of the money, making it work for my future instead of letting it represent my father's past, was a crucial step. It was the first time I felt truly secure, a security that came from myself, not from a parent's approval. The most important investment I made, however, was in a therapist. Dr. Sharma's office was a calm, quiet space where I could finally start to dismantle the complex architecture of my own trauma. We worked through the years of emotional neglect, the constant gaslighting, the insidious effects of being the family scapegoat. Your father's primary tool was to make you doubt your own reality, she explained in one session. He would do something cruel, and then he and your mother would tell you that you were too sensitive or dramatic for reacting to it. Over time, that teaches you to stop trusting your own feelings. It was like she had switched on a light in a dark room I'd been stumbling around in my whole life. The work was hard. Some days I would leave her office feeling raw and exhausted. But with each session, I felt a little stronger, a little more whole. I was learning to trust myself again. I was learning that my feelings were valid. I was learning, as she put it, to finally take up my own space in the world. I made friends. A few colleagues from work, people I met at a local climbing gym. They were simple, easy friendships, built on shared interests, not on a complex web of obligation and history. For the first time, I felt like just Eric. Not Richard's son, not Clara's brother. Just me. And it was more than enough. I had blocked their numbers. All of them. My father, my mother, my aunt. The silence was a necessary part of my healing. I needed to create a space that was free of their influence, their apologies, their demands. So when an unknown number from an Illinois area code flashed on my screen one evening, my instinct was to ignore it. But something made me answer. Hello, a hesitant voice on the other end. Eric? It's me. It's Clara. I was silent for a moment, 100 different emotions swirling inside me. How did you get this number? Mark, she said quickly. I tracked him down. I begged him. He said he would only give it to me if I swore I wasn't calling as their ambassador. I'm not Eric, I swear. This is just me. I leaned back against my kitchen counter, bracing myself. What do you want, Clara? I needed to say I'm sorry, she said, her voice thick with emotion. For everything. For my entire life. For being so blind. For standing by and watching. And for being part of the system that was hurting you. I was so comfortable being the golden girl that I never let myself see the cost of it. And you were the cost, Eric. It was the apology I had never known I needed. It was simple, unadorned with excuses, and it cracked something open inside me. I left too, she said, a fragile note of pride in her voice. I moved to Chicago. The divorce from David is final. It was amicable. He's a good person. He just couldn't live in that prison with me. I have a tiny apartment and a job I love, working for a nonprofit that builds community gardens. It's the first thing I've ever done that Dad didn't approve of. I was speechless. Clara, the princess, was out in the real world, getting her hands dirty. What about them? I finally asked. She let out a long, heavy sigh. It's not good. The whole structure has collapsed. Without you to blame and me to praise, they've just imploded. Dad tried to control my divorce, tried to dictate the terms to the lawyer, and I fired him from my life. I told him he had no say. He hasn't spoken to me since. Mom just calls and cries, asking me when I'm coming home, when we can all be a family again. She doesn't get it. She'll never get that wasn't a family. I asked her about the inheritance, Clara continued, her voice dropping lower. I cornered her. I demanded the truth. And she told me. It was fear, Eric. All of it. Dad's own father abandoned him and his mother when he was a kid. They were poor, they struggled for everything. His entire life has been a desperate attempt to build a fortress of money and control so he would never be abandoned again. He was so terrified you would leave him that he did everything he could to make it impossible for you to go. It doesn't excuse it, she said, her voice hardening. It doesn't forgive a decade of lies. But it's the reason. He crippled you because he was scared. And that's the saddest, most pathetic thing I've ever heard. We talked for another hour. We talked about our childhoods, seeing them now with clear eyes. We talked about our futures. It wasn't the conversation of a golden child and a scapegoat. It was the conversation of two survivors, finding their way out of the same wreckage. It's been a year now. A year since I walked out of that house and into my own life. I'm standing by my window, looking out at the glittering lights of Portland. The city is alive, humming with an energy that feels like possibility. My life is quiet, and I've come to cherish that quiet. It's the quiet of peace, not the quiet of tension. It's the sound of a life lived on my own terms. My project on the waterfront is underway, and seeing my designs turn into a physical structure, something real and lasting, is a feeling I can't describe. It's proof that I can build things, not just for others, but for myself. A few months ago, a letter arrived. It was from my mother. It was handwritten on her expensive stationery, 10 pages of justifications, revisions of history, and pleas for forgiveness. It was all about her pain, her regret, but buried in the last paragraph were 4 words that stopped me cold. I am so sorry. It felt like a confession torn from her after a long and brutal struggle. I read the letter, folded it, and put it away in a drawer. I don't know if I'll ever reply. I've learned that forgiveness isn't a debt you owe to others. It's a gift you give yourself, if and when you're ready. I'm not ready yet, and that's okay. Clara and I are closer than we've ever been. We talk on the phone, we visit. We are slowly, carefully, building a real relationship, one based on honesty and mutual respect. She is a different person now, stronger, happier, more herself than I have ever seen her. I no longer feel the sting of my father's words. In a strange way, I'm grateful for them. That one cruel sentence, "Others just take up space," was the catalyst. It was the truth, spoken aloud, that finally gave me permission to leave. He thought he was delivering a verdict. He had no idea he was handing me a key. And he was right, in a way. I am taking up space. This apartment is my space. This job is my space. This city, this life, this future. It is all my space. It's not something I was given, and it's not something I have to apologize for. It's something I have claimed. Something I have earned. Something I have built. I pour a glass of water from the tap and hold it up to the window, the city lights refracting through it like 1,000 tiny stars. I think of the man I was a year ago, the boy who spent his life trying to be invisible, and I make a silent promise to him that I will never be that small again. I raise the glass, a toast to myself, and whisper the words into the quiet of my own home. Here's to taking up space. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I truly hope it connected with you in some way. It's a vulnerable thing, sharing this, but I believe in the power of our stories to help each other feel less alone. Have you ever had to fight for your own space in a big way or a small one? I would be honored to read your experiences in the comments below. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support means more than you know.